In today's analysis, we're diving into a story that literally shook an entire nation to its core. It forced a massive, incredibly critical conversation about the future of its youth. We're looking at the wildly powerful 2026 student movement in India and the really inspiring story of a young man named Abhijeet Deep. He stepped up to become the voice for not just thousands, but hundreds of thousands of students. And when you consider that millions of applicants in India are often competing for just a few thousand exam spots, the stakes of this story become unbelievably high.
To really wrap our heads around this movement, we first have to understand the sheer emotional gravity of the crisis. I want you to imagine pouring months, maybe even years, of your absolute hardest work into preparing for these highly competitive exams. You sacrifice your sleep, your time, your social life, everything. But then, time and time again, news breaks that the exam paper has been leaked. All that hard work, it's just rendered completely useless in an instant. This wasn't just some administrative glitch, right? It was a deeply psychological toll. Hundreds of thousands, literally lakhs of students, were left watching their futures hang completely in limbo. They were sinking into this deep despair as their dreams were essentially derailed by a broken system.
So moving right into Section 1, the problem and the return. Okay, let's dive into this, because this is where Abhijeet steps in. He had actually been living, studying, and working over in the United States for several years. But as reports of these repeated paper leaks just kept surfacing from different parts of the country back home, he grew deeply, deeply concerned. He realized that if this continuous injustice toward the youth wasn't stopped, the country's brightest talent was going to be severely weakened. He just couldn't stand by and watch. So he made the life-altering decision to pack up, return to India, and strategically launch a brand new organization, the Jantar Party. But here's the catch. Its sole objective was not to play traditional everyday politics. It was created exclusively to take the problems of the students, amplify them, and present them powerfully to the entire nation. A real game changer.
Which brings us to Section 2, the start of the movement. So by the year 2026, fueled heavily by discussions blowing up across social media, what started as a really focused idea began to experience massive organic growth. Youth from across different states just began rallying behind Abhijeet. And it all culminated in a massive, peaceful sit-in protest at Jantar Mantar in Delhi. But the students didn't just show up to vent their anger. They arrived with a highly specific, structured set of goals. First, a completely fair and impartial probe into the leak cases. Second, strict punishment for the culprits responsible. And third, the creation of strong, foolproof systems to just stop this from ever happening again. It was a very clear, actionable roadmap. But as we know, clarity doesn't always equal immediate action. Day 1 passes. Day 2 passes. 1 week goes by. Then many weeks. You can see this timeline representing a growing, heavy frustration. The students sat there day after day, just waiting. But from their perspective, there was absolutely zero concrete action from the government on their demands. The waiting was just agonizing. And this brilliantly illustrates the kind of leadership Abhijeet Deep provided during this incredibly tense waiting period. Despite all the agonizing delays and the growing frustration among the crowds, Abhijeet remained a steadfast anchor. Every single day, he'd address the crowd, reminding them, "Our fight is not against any individual, but against the flaws in the system. We must present our views democratically." He maintained this absolutely unwavering commitment to a strictly peaceful approach.
All right, Section 3, the March to Parliament. As time dragged on, the movement didn't fizzle out at all. It actually exploded in size. Students from all over the country started pouring into Delhi. The crowd at Jantar Mantar swelled from thousands into lakhs. With no resolution anywhere in sight, Abhijeet and the movement's leaders made a massive decision. They were going to escalate their peaceful protest by marching directly to Parliament to make their voices heard. On the designated morning, lakhs of students, carrying tricolors and banners, began their march. The air was absolutely electric. You could hear the crowds chanting, "Justice for students." The voices just kept multiplying, roaring through the streets. "Stop paper leaks!" Until it reached an absolute crescendo, literally shaking the roads they walked on. Save the future of youth. Which leads us right into Section 4, clash and tension. The march was surging forward, right? But as they approached Parliament Street, they hit a wall, a heavy, overwhelming police deployment. Massive barricades were set up for security reasons. The leaders and the police actually attempted to have a dialogue to find some sort of compromise, but the talks failed. And then the situation deteriorated rapidly.
chaos completely erupted. To hold back the massive surging crowd, police began to use force. News of a lathicharge ripped through the crowd, sparking absolute panic. A stampede-like situation broke out. Students were running in every direction, people were falling to the ground, many were injured. In just a matter of moments, what had been this beautiful symbol of peaceful, democratic protest had violently transformed into a heartbreaking picture of struggle and profound pain.
The news of this clash spread across the entire country instantly. And it's important to look at how the nation reacted, because honestly, the divide was absolute. It became a fierce debate between two competing perspectives. On one side, you had the argument emphasizing the absolute necessity of maintaining strict law and order, pointing to the massive scale of the crowd and the security of Parliament. On the flip side, there was a fierce argument that the students' voices crying out about their ruined futures, needed to be handled with much greater urgency and sensitivity, rather than with force. But right in the middle of this intense chaos and national polarization, Abhijeet Deep immediately stepped forward to address his supporters. He urgently appealed for absolute peace. He told them, "We will not adopt the path of violence. Our strength is our unity, our voice, and our democratic right." Even in the face of physical conflict, he completely refused to let the movement lose its democratic soul.
Finally, Section 5, Democracy and Resolution. This entire story serves as a really powerful reminder of a deeply delicate balance inherent in our society. It highlights the fundamental right of citizens in a democracy to raise their voices in protest, weighed constantly against the state's absolute requirement to maintain law, order, and public safety. So what is the crucial point here? What should you take away from all this? Well, it's that the ultimate goal of any movement must be resolution and dialogue. Clashes don't solve the root issue. This story brilliantly illustrates that when the youth unite over a shared injustice, their collective voice becomes so incredibly loud that it forces an entire nation to stop, listen, and have a conversation they can no longer ignore.
Which leaves us with the most important part of this analysis, the path forward. The paper leaks ruined years of hard work, and the resulting movement showed the sheer power of united youth. But the core problem, that requires systemic reform. So I want to leave you with this provocative question to really think about. What precise, actionable steps should be taken right now to permanently secure students' futures against these systemic failures? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to reflect on that question.